Nobody briefed me on the princess. That was, I was told afterward, intentional. The Saravathi delegation had been at Velith Station for 11 days. In that time, the princess had dismissed 4 diplomatic handlers, 14 senior matchmakers dispatched by her own court, 26 additional matchmakers sourced from the residency's cultural registry, 2 grief counselors retained at significant expense by the station director, and 1 very patient chaplain of indeterminate species who had apparently sat outside her door for 6 hours, offering to discuss the nature of loss before she told him, through the door, and in a voice that carried clearly down the corridor, that she was not interested. None of that was my problem. I run the kitchen at Compound 9. I have been running it for 9 years. My remit is breakfast, midday service, evening service, and the twice-weekly diplomatic receptions that the residency holds to justify its funding allocation. The princess's dietary preferences had been filed with us 11 days ago. Saravathi physiology, no sulfuric compounds, moderate salt tolerance, preference for cool temperature service, and for 11 days she had not appeared for a single meal. I sent the trays up. They came back untouched. I sent different trays. Same result. On the morning of day 11, Station Director Hassel called me into his office and told me directly that the summit was at risk of collapse, that the Saravathi cultural attaché had transmitted 3 formal notifications of concern to the IWC, and that I was to continue sending appropriate trays, but was otherwise to have no interaction with Compound 9's restricted wing. He said this in the way he says all things, very quickly, with his hands folded, looking at the middle distance. I told him I understood. He thanked me, and I went back to prep. What I did not tell him was that I needed to retrieve a stock pot from the restricted wing service corridor. It had been left there 2 days prior during a delivery run, and it was my second largest pot, and we had a reception scheduled for the following evening. I went that afternoon, during the quiet hour between midday service and evening prep. The restricted wing corridors are narrow. The residency was retrofitted from an old survey station, and the service passages were not designed with diplomatic grandeur in mind. They smell of cold recycled air, and faintly, of the cleaning compound the maintenance crew use on the floor panels. I walked down the corridor, found my pot exactly where I'd left it, and picked it up. That was when I heard it. Nothing. Not a sound from the princess's suite. Not the low tonal hum that Saravathi quarters typically carry when the atmospheric processors are running. Not movement. Not the subdued flicker of active light panels under the door. Nothing. I am not a diplomat. I am not a grief counselor, or a matchmaker, or a chaplain. I am a man who has been cooking in institutional kitchens for 31 years, and in that time, I have learned to recognize the specific quality of silence that comes from a space where someone has stopped caring whether they eat. I know it because I have been in that space myself. A long time ago, when my wife died, and I worked on a relay station on the outer lanes, and there was nobody to tell me to eat, and so I didn't, for 4 days, until the station cook knocked on my door with a bowl of something simple and sat outside until I opened up. I have never forgotten it. It came back to me, standing in that service corridor with my stock pot, listening to the specific quality of nothing coming from under that door. I went back to the kitchen. I took 2 hours. The reception menu for the following evening required my attention, and I gave it that attention first, because the thing I was going to make next was not for any menu. It was not a Saravathi preparation. It was not from the cultural registry or the dietary protocol files. It was what my mother made on the stations where I grew up, when the heating system dropped and the ration delivery was late, and there was nothing particularly good in the stores, but there was something, and she made it into something warm. Rootstock, dried, rehydrated with station water, 2 kinds of grain. A handful of the preserved greens I keep in the back of my personal stores, because nobody else wants them. Salt, not much else. The kind of thing that takes 40 minutes and smells, by the end, of something that is not quite home, but is in the direction of it. I made a large batch. I ate a bowl standing at the prep counter, because I had not eaten since morning, and I was hungry. Then I ladled a second bowl, covered it with a cloth to keep the temperature, put it on a small tray, and walked back to the restricted wing. I set the tray down outside the door, not directly in front of it, off to one side, where it would not be in the way if someone opened the door quickly. I did not knock. I did not announce myself. I had no business being in that corridor, and I was not going to compound the situation by making it a formal gesture that required a response. I sat down on the floor on the other side of the corridor, my back against the wall, my bowl in my hands, and I ate. The floor is cold in that corridor. I ate slowly, because there was no reason to hurry, and because the stew was better than I'd expected, given what I'd had to work with. I was about halfway through when I heard the door. It did not open all the way. It opened perhaps 30 centimeters. Then it stopped. I did not look up. I kept eating. After a moment, I heard the soft sound of a tray being lifted from the floor. I did not look up. A little while after that, I cannot say how long exactly, I was focused on my bowl. I heard the door open further. I heard the very quiet sound of someone settling onto a floor. I looked up then. The Princess Alayan was sitting cross-legged in the doorway of her suite, her back straight in the way that Saravathi keep their backs straight, whether they are at a formal reception or apparently sitting on the floor of a service corridor, the tray across her knees, the bowl in her hands. She was looking at the stew. She was not looking at me. Her coloring was what the registry said, silver gold, very pale, with the faint bioluminescent tracery along the cheekbones and temples that the Saravathi carry. Her eyes, when she finally moved them to the bowl, were very dark. She looked tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. She raised the bowl to her lips in the Saravathi manner and drank a small amount. She was quiet for a while. I finished my bowl. I did not speak, because there was nothing that required saying, and I am not a man who fills silence with words when the silence is doing something. After a time, she said, in Standard, which her file said she spoke fluently, though none of the 40-odd handlers and matchmakers had apparently managed to get that far. What is this? Not a question. The kind of flat statement that is actually asking something. Stew, I said. She considered that. It tastes, she said, like nothing I was given in the protocol files. No, I said, it wouldn't. Another silence. She drank more from the bowl. I set mine down on the floor beside me. You are not one of the matchmakers, she said. I run the kitchen. She looked at me for the first time, directly. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Then she looked back at her bowl. The matchmakers brought me 17 different traditional Saravathi grief presentation menus, she said, in the correct order of morning sequence. A pause. My husband was Saravathi. I know the sequence. I expect you do, I said. They also brought me 4 volumes of comparative grief philosophy, 2 therapeutic soundscape archives, and a ceremonial lamp intended to honor the passage of a bonded partner. Another pause. The lamp was very beautiful. I imagine it was. It did not help. No, I said. I don't suppose it would. She finished the bowl. She set it back on the tray with a care that suggested she had been taught to handle things carefully, regardless of how she felt. She looked at the wall across the corridor for a while. Why did you not knock? She said. You'd already told everyone to go away, I said. I didn't have anything to say that would change your mind about that. I just had a second bowl. She was quiet again. I let her be. When she finally rose, smoothly, without using her hands, she picked up the tray and held it for a moment, as if she wasn't sure what to do with it. I stood and held out my hand. She passed it to me. Tomorrow, she said, to the corridor rather than to me. Will you bring this again? If you want it, I said. She went back inside. The door closed. I carried both trays back to the kitchen, washed the bowls, and went to start the prep for the evening reception. I found out the rest from Director Hassel, the following morning, in a meeting I had not been invited to, but was summoned to with 11 minutes' notice. The morning debrief footage from the corridor sensors had been reviewed by the entire diplomatic team at 6 in the morning. There were, by all accounts, a significant number of people in that viewing room, and a significant period of silence after the footage ran. The cultural attaché had transmitted a formal communication at 7:40, naming me by role, not by name, which told me something about how seriously they took the kitchen staff's filing information, as the princess's requested point of contact for the remainder of her stay. The residency's diplomatic coordinator had spent 2 hours explaining that the head cook was not a position that carried formal escort designation under the Treaty of Velith protocols. The attaché had listened to this in full and then reiterated the request. The 42 matchmakers, or such of them as remained on station, had submitted a joint formal objection to the IWC registry on the grounds that the facilitation of a royal bonded partner's re-engagement protocols was a matter of cultural certification that a non-Saravathi kitchen worker did not possess. Director Hassel looked at me across his desk. He had the expression of a man who has been awake since before 6 and has not yet had enough to eat. "They're asking me," he said, "to designate you as a diplomatic escort." "I'd need to know what the hours are," I said. "I have a reception tomorrow evening." He stared at me. "Orvith," he said. "I'm not refusing," I said. "I'm asking about the schedule." He closed his eyes for a moment. "What did you do?" he said. "I made stew," I said, and I sat on the floor. He was quiet for a long time, the kind of quiet that has a lot of things moving through it. "She has not eaten," he said, "in 11 days. "She ate last night," I said. He looked at me. I looked at him. "The matchmakers," he said carefully, "have combined credentials totaling 417 years of Saravathi cultural practice." "I expect they do," I said. "You have a second bowl," I said, "and a floor." Another silence. Outside, down the corridor, I could hear the morning kitchen crew starting the breakfast service without me, which meant the bread rotation was going to be off by 12 minutes, and we would probably run short on the grain rolls. I needed to get back. "Log it as cultural liaison, ancillary," I said. "Whatever the forms require. I'll sign them when they're ready. But I need to get back to the kitchen." Director Hassel looked at me for a long moment. "She's a princess," he said. "She's somebody who hasn't eaten in 11 days, I said. "And she has, now." I set his non-existent folder back on his desk and went back to the kitchen. The bread was 12 minutes behind. I fixed it. That evening I left a covered tray outside the suite at the same time as the night before, sat in the same spot on the corridor floor with my own bowl. The door opened within a few minutes. She sat in the doorway again. We ate. When she finished, she asked about the grain, what kind, where it came from, and I told her. She said it was different from Saravathi grain, but not unpleasant. I said most things were different but not unpleasant, if you gave them enough time. She looked at me then, the same direct 3-second look as the night before. "You lost someone," she said, not a question. "A while ago," I said. She looked back at her bowl. "Did it pass?" she said. "No," I said. "You just get better at carrying it." She was quiet for the rest of the meal. When she stood to go, she paused in the doorway. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," I said. The formal objection from the matchmakers was logged in the IWC registry 3 days later. I read the summary in the incident report that Director Hassel forwarded to me, signed the acknowledgement field, and filed it. Then I started the prep for the morning bread, because it was 5:45, and we had 60 covers for the diplomatic breakfast, and if I didn't get the oven running in the next 10 minutes, we were going to be behind. The princess ate with me for 14 days. On the last morning before the delegation's departure, she came to the kitchen herself, something that caused, I was told, a significant amount of concern among the security detail, and stood at the pass and asked me to show her how the stew was made. I showed her. She watched carefully. She said nothing until I was done. Then she said, "My mother used to make something like this, on the ships, when we were young, before the formal residences." "I know the feeling," I said. She looked at me. "Thank you," she said, "for the floor." "You're welcome," I said, "for the stew." She left with the delegation that afternoon. I logged the cultural liaison duty as completed, filed it, and went to start the evening service. It was just a pot of stew, a corridor floor, a second bowl. That's the whole of it.